Some stories find us when we need them most. This is one of those stories about a man who spent 35 years building an empire but forgot how to live. About a wounded dog who taught him what no boardroom ever could. It is about second chances, the quiet courage it takes to stand alone, and the unexpected places where we find redemption. If you have ever felt invisible, overlooked, or wondered whether kindness still matters in this world, this story is for you. My grandmother used to say that the measure of a person is not what they build, but what they are willing to protect. I did not understand her then. I reckon I do now. We begin not at the beginning, but in the middle of a cold night, in an alley behind an old veterinary clinic where two broken souls are about to cross paths. The Bentley's headlights cut through the darkness of the alley. Edward Sterling's hands tightened on the steering wheel, 58 years old, $3,000 suit, and here he was taking the long way home through streets he had no business driving down. He did not know why he had turned here tonight. 7 years of different routes, different roads, always moving, never arriving anywhere that mattered. The clinic had been closed for months. Foreclosure sign hanging crooked on the door, weeds pushing through cracks in the pavement. The air smelled of rain and something else, something sour, like garbage left too long in summer heat. He was about to pull away when the headlights caught something by the dumpster. A shape, gray and matted, wrapped in dirty bandages that had once been white. Edward's foot moved to the gas pedal. Keep driving. It is not your problem. You have a company to run. Meetings tomorrow. The Henderson deal needs... The shape moved, just barely. A head lifting from the concrete. Eyes. Brown gold. Like old honey left too long in the jar, and Edward had seen a lot of things in 35 years of business, hostile takeovers, bankruptcies, men begging for second chances they did not deserve. But he had never seen eyes like these, not pleading, not afraid, just empty, the look of something that had stopped expecting anything from anyone. He knew that look. Every morning, in his bathroom mirror, it stared back at him. The engine idled. His hands did not move from the wheel. This is foolish. It is a stray. Call animal control. Let someone else handle it. The dog's head dropped back to the pavement. Slow, like even that small effort had cost everything it had left. Edward turned off the engine. The smell hit him first. Infection, dried blood, something rotting beneath the bandages. He crouched down, Italian leather shoes soaking in a puddle of something he did not want to identify. The dog did not growl, did not snap, just watched him with those honey-colored eyes. Waiting. Waiting for what? A kick a stone. Quite a mess you got yourself into, Edward muttered. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. He could not remember the last time he had spoken to anything that was not a spreadsheet or a speakerphone. The bandages on the front leg were brown with old blood, wrapped by someone who knew just enough to try, but not enough to help. Beneath them, Edward could see swelling. Wrong angles where there should not be angles. Someone had done this, not an accident, not a car. Someone had taken a pipe or a bat and... He stopped that thought. Gently, so gently it surprised even himself. He slid his hands beneath the dog's body. It weighed nothing. Bones and fur and the fading warmth of something barely holding on to life. The dog did not struggle, did not make a sound. It just looked at him. Those empty eyes suddenly holding something else, not hope, not quite, but maybe the memory of what hope used to feel like. Sarah Mitchell was cleaning instruments when the door banged open. 20 years in emergency veterinary medicine. She had seen panicked pet owners at every hour of the night, carrying everything from goldfish to Great Danes. But Edward Sterling, the Edward Sterling, whose face she had seen in the business section more times than she could count standing in her doorway at 11 p.m. with a dying German shepherd in his arms. That was new. "It needs help." His voice was flat, controlled, the voice of a man who gave orders and expected them followed. But his hands, she noticed. His hands were shaking. "Put it on the table." The dog was worse than she expected, much worse. Sarah pulled on gloves, working quickly, cutting away the filthy bandages. Her jaw tightened, but she kept her face neutral. Professional. Compound fracture of the metacarpals. Severe infection. She probed gently, and the dog whimpered the first sound it had made. "These wounds are not from an accident, Mr. Sterling. Someone did this deliberately. A blunt object. Bat. Maybe. Or a pipe." Edward said nothing, but a muscle in his jaw twitched. "There is scarring around the neck, too. Old scarring. This dog has been chained up before. Kept that way for a long time." She straightened, pulling off her gloves. "I will be straight with you. We can try to save the leg. 6 months of rehabilitation, minimum, pain, every day, multiple surgeries, or..." She paused. "Or we can let it go. Peacefully. No more suffering." Edward looked at the dog on the table. It had stopped whimpering. Its eyes were open, fixed on the ceiling, like it had already accepted whatever came next. "It wants to live," Edward said quietly. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "And how do you know that—" He did not answer, just kept looking at the dog. Finally, he spoke again. "Do whatever it takes. Money is not an issue." Sarah studied him for a long moment. In 2 decades, she had learned to read people by how they treated animals. The nervous ones, the guilty ones, the ones who just wanted a problem to disappear. Edward Sterling was not any of those. She did not know what he was. "I will need you to sign some forms." "Fine. And Mr. Sterling..." She waited until he looked at her. "Whatever you are looking for, I hope you find it." His expression did not change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Something old and buried and almost forgotten. "I stopped looking a long time ago. Doc..." 3 in the morning. Edward sat in the plastic chair of the waiting room, still in his blood-stained suit, staring at the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. He should call his driver, should go home to the 15,000-square-foot house where no one was waiting, should get 3 hours of sleep before the board meeting that would determine the future of a $50 million development. Instead, he sat. The clinic was quiet except for the hum of machines in the back room. The air smelled of antiseptic and floor wax. Somewhere, a clock ticked steadily, the kind of old clock his mother used to keep in her kitchen, back when kitchens still had clocks on the wall. He did not know why he was still here. It is just a dog, a stray. You did your part, paid the bills, let the professionals handle it. But he did not move. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice he had not heard in 7 years whispered, "Daddy, it was hurt and nobody helped it, so I did." Tommy's voice. 8 years old, holding a half-dead kitten he had found by the railroad tracks. Edward closed his eyes. He had not thought about that day in years, had trained himself not to. There was a wall in his mind, carefully constructed, professionally maintained. Behind it lived everything from before. The accident, the hospital, the small coffin he had helped carry on a March morning when the sky had the audacity to be perfectly blue. The wall had kept him functional, kept him building, acquiring, succeeding, kept him breathing when breathing was the only thing he could manage. But walls, he was learning, do not last forever. "Mr. Sterling." He opened his eyes. Sarah was standing in the doorway, surgical mask pulled down around her neck. "The surgery went well. We saved the leg, Edward nodded. His throat felt tight. It will be a long recovery, months of physical therapy, and there may be complications. Infection is still a risk, but... She paused, something almost like wonder in her voice. That dog fought harder than I have seen in a long time, like it had something to live for. Edward stood. His joints ached from the plastic chair. Can I see it? Sarah hesitated. Usually, we do not allow, please. The word came out rougher than he intended. Raw. He could not remember the last time he had said please to anyone. Sarah studied his face. Whatever she saw there made her step aside. 5 minutes. The recovery room was small and sterile. Medical equipment beeped softly in the darkness. And there, on a heated mat, wrapped in clean white bandages, lay the dog. Its eyes were open, watching him. Edward stood in the doorway, suddenly uncertain. What was he doing here? What did he expect? He stepped closer, slowly, like approaching something wild and unpredictable. The dog's tail moved, just once, just a tiny motion. Edward's breath caught. You fought hard. Did you not? His voice was barely a whisper. Fought when there was not any reason to. When everyone gave up on you. The dog's eyes never left his face. Edward sank into the chair beside the mat. His hand moved of its own accord, hovering over the dog's head without quite touching. I used to know someone like that, he said quietly. Someone who never gave up on anything, even when he should have. The dog's nose touched his hand. Cool, dry, barely there. But deliberate. Edward felt something crack in his chest. Something that had been frozen for 7 years. I am going to take you home, he heard himself say. I do not know why. Do not know what I am doing. But I am going to take you home. The dog's eyes closed. For the first time in its miserable, beaten life. Something that looked like peace settled over its features. And Edward Sterling, the man they called the Stone, who had not shed a tear in 7 years, sat in the darkness of a veterinary recovery room and felt wetness on his cheeks. He did not wipe it away. If this story has touched you so far, we would love to hear where you are watching from. As the old folks say, where there is kindness, there is hope. The drive home took 40 minutes. Edward kept glancing at the rearview mirror. The dog lay on the back seat, wrapped in a blanket Sarah had provided. Its breath shallow but steady. The dashboard clock read 4:47 a.m. Outside. The first hint of gray touched the horizon. The gates of the estate swung open automatically. The driveway curved through manicured lawns, past hedges trimmed sharp as rulers, past stone fountains that had not run in years. Edward pulled up to the front entrance and cut the engine. The house loomed before him. 15,000 square feet of imported marble and hand-carved woodwork. 27 rooms. The smell of lemon polish and old wood seeped through even the closed windows, a smell he had stopped noticing years ago. And not a single soul who would notice if he never came home. He gathered the dog carefully, mindful of the bandaged leg, and pushed through the front door. Margaret stood in the foyer, her hand frozen halfway to the light switch. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked steadily, marking seconds that suddenly felt heavy. 68 years old, gray hair pinned back in the same style she had worn for 2 decades. She had been with the Sterling family since before Tommy was born. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Mr. Sterling, sir, is that? Find a room for it. Ground floor, near my study. He did not wait for a response, just walked past her. The dog's weight surprisingly light in his arms. His shoes left faint, muddy prints on the marble. Behind him, He heard Margaret's sharp intake of breath, heard her sensible shoes clicking rapidly on the floor as she hurried to follow. "Sir, should I call someone a vet? The animal control. Already seen a vet. But, sir, this house. We have never had—" She trailed off. Edward stopped, turned. Margaret stood 3 feet away, her face caught between confusion and something else. The hall chandelier cast long shadows across her weathered features. Not fear, not exactly. Something deeper. In 15 years of managing this house, she had never seen Edward Sterling bring anything living through those doors. No pets, no houseplants, nothing that required care or feeding or attention. The house was a museum, beautiful and sterile and perfectly preserved. And now here he stood, blood on his shirt, holding a half-dead stray like it was made of glass. "The East Wing," Edward said quietly. "The room across from my study. Put down some blankets." Margaret nodded slowly. Her eyes moved to the dog, taking in the bandages, the matted fur, the visible ribs beneath the thin skin. "Sir," she said softly, "what happened to it?" Edward looked down at the dog in his arms. Its eyes were closed now, but one ear twitched at the sound of Margaret's voice. "Someone threw it away," he said. "Like it was nothing." He started walking again. Behind him, Margaret stood motionless in the marble foyer, one hand pressed to her mouth. She was remembering another night, 15 years ago. A little boy in pajamas, standing in the same spot, cradling an injured kitten. "Margaret, it was hurt. I could not just leave it." The same words, almost the same voice. Edward laid the dog on the blankets Margaret had hastily arranged. The room smelled of cedar and dust. It had not been used in years. Pale morning light crept through heavy curtains. The dog stirred, eyes fluttering open, scanning the unfamiliar space with that same wary emptiness. "You are safe now," Edward murmured. The dog looked at him, looked at the doorway, looked back at him, then it lowered its head onto the blanket and let out a long, shuddering breath. Edward stood. His knees ached. His back protested. He was too old for this, too tired, too far gone. But as he turned to leave, he heard it. A soft sound, almost nothing. The dog's tail, brushing against the blanket. Once, just once. Edward's hand found the doorframe. His fingers gripped the wood until his knuckles went white. My father used to say that the truest things in life come without words. I reckon he was right. The house settled into silence around him, but sleep would not come. At 2 a.m., Edward found himself standing outside the dog's room, listening. Soft whimpering drifted through the door, paws scraping weakly against fabric. A muffled cry, the sound of something trapped in a dream it could not escape. He pushed the door open. The dog lay in the corner, not on the blankets, but pressed against the wall, legs twitching, breath coming in rapid gasps. Moonlight fell through a gap in the curtains, catching the white of its bandages. Nightmare. Edward stepped inside. The floor was cold beneath his bare feet. The cedar smell was stronger here, mixed with something else, the faint musk of frightened animal. He did not touch the dog, did not reach for it, just lowered himself to the ground, back against the wall, and sat. "I know," he said quietly into the darkness. "The dreams do not stop. Even when you wake up, they are right there waiting." The dog's eyes snapped open. Its body went rigid, ears flat, ready to bolt or bite or both. Edward did not move. "Easy," he murmured. "I am not going to hurt you. Just sitting here. That is all." Minutes passed. The clock downstairs chimed twice. The dog's breathing slowed, its muscles unclenched. One by one, it did not come closer, but it stopped trying to disappear into the wall. "When my son was little," Edward heard himself say, "he used to sleep on the floor with every stray he brought home. Said they were scared. Said they needed to know someone was there." The words came out rusty, unused. "I never understood it. Thought it was foolish. Sentimental." The dog's head tilted slightly. "Turns out," Edward said, "he was the smart one." Silence settled over them. Edward's eyes grew heavy, his head nodded forward. Just before sleep took him, he heard movement, soft, careful. He opened one eye. The dog had moved. Not much, just a few inches, but it was facing him now, watching him with those honey-brown eyes, and in them, Edward saw something that had not been there in the alley, a question. "Are you staying?" He woke to gray morning light and the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Margaret stood in the doorway, a tray of coffee in her hands. Her face frozen in an expression Edward could not read, the smell of fresh coffee mixed with the cedar and dust. "Sir," she said carefully, "you have a board meeting in 2 hours." Edward looked down. The dog had moved again during the night. It was lying less than a foot away now, its muzzle almost touching his knee, still watching him, still waiting for an answer he was not sure he knew how to give. "Cancel it," Edward said. Margaret's eyes widened. "Sir, the Henderson deal." "I said, cancel it." The words came out sharper than he intended. Margaret nodded stiffly, set down the coffee, retreated without another word. Edward looked at the dog. "Well," he muttered, "guess it is just you and me now." The dog's ear twitched, and somewhere deep in those guarded eyes, Edward caught a flicker of something that might have been the beginning of trust, or maybe just the absence of fear. For now, that was enough. But as he reached for his coffee, his phone buzzed on the floor beside him. Richard Thornton, his oldest friend. Vice president of the company Edward had built from nothing. 3 missed calls, and a text message that made Edward's blood run cold. "Ed, we need to talk. The Preston kid's father knows about the dog. He's asking questions. Call me back. Now." Edward stared at the phone screen until the words blurred. The Preston kid. His mind flashed to the alley, the group of young men outside the bar, the one who had started to say something before his friend shut him up. "Hey, ain't that the dog we—" His fingers hovered over Richard's number. The smart move was to call back, smooth things over, find out what the Prestons knew and what they wanted. That is what Edward Sterling would do. The Edward Sterling who had built an empire on knowing when to push and when to fold. But that Edward Sterling had not slept on a cold floor with a beaten dog. He set the phone face down on the hardwood. The dog watched him from its spot by the wall, still wary, still keeping distance. But its eyes tracked his every movement now with something other than fear. Curiosity. Maybe, or the beginning of it. "Looks like we stirred up some trouble," Edward said quietly. The dog's ear rotated toward his voice. Edward pushed himself up from the floor. His joints protested. 58 years old and sleeping on hardwood like some kind of fool. But he had slept, really slept, for the first time in longer than he could remember. He picked up his phone again, ignored Richard's messages, scrolled to another contact. Sarah Mitchell answered on the second ring. "Dr. Mitchell, it is Edward Sterling. I need information about the dog, everything you found, the microchip records, previous owners, all of it." A pause on the other end. He could hear the hum of equipment in the background, the distant bark of another patient. "Mr. Sterling, I told you what I found. A family in Burlington, the divorce, the little girl. I need names, addresses, And I need to know if anyone else has been asking about this dog. Another pause, longer this time. Why would someone be asking? Edward walked to the window, outside. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawn. Dew sparkled on grass that cost more to maintain than most folks earned in a month. Somewhere out there, people were waking up to ordinary days, ordinary problems. Because I think I know who heard it, and I think they know I know. Silence stretched through the phone line. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 8 times. I will send you what I have, Sarah finally said. But Mr. Sterling, be careful. People who hurt animals, they do not usually stop there. Edward ended the call. The dog had moved while he was talking, just a few inches closer. Its nose twitched, catching scents Edward could not detect. You know, do you not? Edward crouched down slowly, keeping his movements deliberate. You know exactly who did this to you. The dog's tail tucked tight against its body. It is okay, Edward said. We are going to figure this out together. The next 5 days passed in a rhythm Edward had not experienced in decades. Morning check on the dog's bandages. Prepare food, plain boiled chicken, the way Sarah had instructed. Sit on the floor while it ate. Backs turned to each other, learning to share space. The kitchen smelled of chicken broth and coffee, scents that had not filled this house in years. Afternoon, physical therapy exercises Sarah had prescribed, gentle movements, patient repetition. The dog's leg was healing, but trust came slower than bone. Evening. Sitting in the study, reading reports he no longer cared about, while the dog lay across the room. Watching. The tick of the mantel clock, the creak of old wood settling, the soft rhythm of the dog's breathing, always watching. On day 3. It ate while Edward sat facing it. A small victory that felt larger than any deal he had ever closed. On day 4, it let him change the bandages without trembling. Its fur was softer than he expected, warming under his careful hands. On day 5, it followed him from room to room. Not close, always 3 or 4 feet behind, but following nonetheless, like a shadow. Shadow, Edward said aloud, testing the word. The afternoon light slanted through the study windows, catching dust motes in the air. The dog stopped, looked at him directly. That is your name now. Shadow. The dog's head tilted. Its tail moved just once, just barely. Edward felt something loosen in his chest, something that had been wound tight for 7 years. Richard showed up unannounced. On day 6, Edward was in the garden, actually in the garden, for the first time since Tommy used to play there watching Shadow attempt to walk on grass. The dog's injured leg buckled occasionally, but it kept trying, kept pushing forward. Birds sang in the old oak tree. The air smelled of cut grass and earth warming in the sun. Edward turned. Richard Thornton stood on the patio, hands in his pockets, face arranged in that careful expression he used for difficult negotiations. His golf shirt was pressed, his loafers polished, everything about him calculated. You have not returned my calls. I have been busy. Richard's eyes moved to Shadow, who had frozen at the stranger's voice, body low, ears flat. So that is it, huh? That is what all this is about? Edward said nothing. Ed, listen to me. Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice. Charlie Preston's kid was one of the boys who had some fun with that animal. It was stupid. It was wrong, but they are kids. Ed, kids do dumb things. That dog's leg was broken in 3 places, and the Preston family is willing to pay for all veterinary expenses, plus a donation to the local shelter, $50,000. Ed, to make this go away. Shadow had retreated behind Edward's legs. Edward could feel the dog's body pressed against his calves, trembling slightly, warm and small and trusting. "Make what go away, Richard." "You know what?" Richard's careful expression slipped, revealing frustration underneath. "The questions you have been asking, the calls to the police chief. People are talking. Ed, important people." "Good." Richard blinked. "Good. Someone should be talking about it." "Ed?" Richard stepped closer still, close enough that Edward could smell his cologne, the same expensive brand he had worn for 20 years. "Think about what you are doing. The Preston family has been a partner in our developments for a decade. Harrison and his people control the zoning board. You start making accusations, real accusations, and everything we have built, everything I built." The words came out quiet, but they landed hard. Richard's face changed, the mask of friendship cracking around the edges. "Is that how it is now? That is how it has always been." "Richard, you just forgot." A muscle twitched in Richard's jaw. "You are making a mistake. Ed, a big one. Probably. For a dog. A stray dog that was half dead in an alley." Edward looked down at Shadow, still pressed against his legs, still trembling, but no longer running. Trusting him. "My mother used to say you can judge a man by how he treats those who cannot do anything for him. I reckon I finally understand what she meant." "Maybe," Edward said slowly. "That is exactly why." Richard stared at him for a long moment, then he shook his head. "I tried, Ed. Remember that. I tried to warn you." He turned and walked back through the house. His footsteps echoed on the marble, then faded. The front door opened, closed. Shadow's trembling gradually stopped. "That," Edward said quietly, "was a man I have known for 30 years. Called him my best friend." Shadow looked up at him. "Turns out I did not know him at all." That night, Edward sat in his study, Shadow lying at his feet for the first time, not across the room, not in the doorway, at his feet, close enough to touch. He did not touch, not yet. Some walls took longer to come down. His phone buzzed, a message from Sarah Mitchell. "Found something interesting. The dog's original owner, the little girl in Burlington, her name is Emily. Her mother contacted the shelter 6 times, trying to find out what happened to him after the last family gave him up. Never got an answer." Edward read the message twice. A little girl, searching for her lost dog, never knowing if it was alive or dead. His hand moved to the photo frame on his desk, the one he had kept face down for 7 years. Slowly, he turned it over. Tommy smiled up at him. 8 years old, holding a kitten. The photo was faded now, the colors softened by time. "Daddy, I could not just leave it." Edward's throat tightened. "I should tell her," he said to Shadow. "That little girl, she deserves to know you are alive." Shadow's tail brushed against the floor. "But that means—" He could not finish the sentence. It meant giving Shadow back, returning him to his rightful owner. It meant being alone again. Edward sat in the darkness, holding his dead son's photograph, while the dog he had saved lay trusting at his feet. The phone buzzed again, this time, not Sarah, an unknown number. "Mr. Sterling, we know where the dog came from. We know about the girl in Burlington. Drop this, or we make sure she finds out exactly what happened to her precious pet. Every detail, with pictures." Edward's blood turned to ice. They were not just threatening him anymore. They were threatening a child. Edward's thumb hovered over the phone screen. The message glowed in the darkness of his study, each word a small knife, with pictures. They had documented it. The beating, the torture. And now they wanted to use those images against a 10-year-old girl. Shadow stirred at his feet, sensing the change in his breathing. Edward set the phone down carefully. His hands were steady. 35 years in business had taught him to control his body even when his mind was screaming. Think. Do not react. Think. The Prestons, the Harrisons, maybe others. These were families he had known for decades, families he had done business with, shared dinners with, played golf with at the country club every Thursday, and they were threatening to traumatize a child to protect their sons. He picked up the phone again, not to respond to the threat, to make a different call. Sarah, I need Emily's mother's contact information. Tonight. The drive to Burlington took 2 hours. Shadow sat in the back seat, alert now, watching the darkness slide past the windows. The dog had hesitated at the car door, memories of other vehicles clearly surfacing. But Edward had waited, patient, until Shadow had climbed in on his own. Small victories. Edward's phone sat silent on the passenger seat. He had turned off notifications after forwarding the threatening message to his personal lawyer with specific instructions. Document everything. If anything happens to me, this goes to every news outlet in New England. Insurance, the only kind that mattered now. The GPS guided him through unfamiliar streets. Burlington was smaller than Hartfield, less polished. Working-class neighborhoods gave way to apartment complexes with peeling paint and shared parking lots. Streetlights flickered orange against the night sky. He pulled up outside a modest building. 3rd floor, apartment 3B, the address Sarah had provided, 11 p.m., lights still on behind thin curtains. The smell of someone's late supper drifted from an open window. Something with garlic and onions. Edward sat in the car, engine idling. What was he doing here? What could he possibly say? Hello, I have your daughter's dog, the one that was beaten nearly to death. Also, some wealthy families are threatening to send your child photographs of the abuse unless I stop asking questions. Shadow whined softly from the back seat. Edward looked in the rearview mirror. The dog was watching him with those steady brown-gold eyes. Waiting. You are right, Edward muttered. Sitting here will not fix anything. He cut the engine. The woman who answered the door was younger than he expected. Mid-30s, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. She wore a faded sweatshirt and jeans that had seen better days. She looked at Edward with the guarded expression of someone used to bad news arriving unannounced. Mrs. Patterson, it is Ms. now, who is asking, My name is Edward Sterling. I am here about your daughter's dog. The guardedness cracked. Something raw flickered underneath. Max. You know something about Max? Edward nodded slowly. He is alive. He is in my car. Miss Patterson's hand flew to her mouth. Her knees buckled slightly, and she grabbed the doorframe for support. I need to explain some things first. May I come in? The apartment was small but clean. Photographs lined the walls, a little girl with gap-toothed smile in a school picture. The same girl, older. Holding a German Shepherd puppy, both of them grinning at the camera, Emily. The furniture was worn but carefully arranged. A crocheted blanket lay folded over the back of a second-hand couch. The air smelled of lavender air freshener and something baking cookies. Maybe. Left in the oven too long. Miss Patterson sat on the edge of the worn couch, hands clasped tight enough to turn her knuckles white. I looked everywhere, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Called every shelter in Vermont. Posted flyers on every telephone pole in town. Emily cried herself to sleep for months. The family we gave him to, they said he ran away. But I never believed. She stopped, swallowed hard. What happened to him? Edward told her. Not everything. Not the worst details, but enough. The color drained from her face. And these people, these families, they are threatening to send Emily photographs. Yes. Miss Patterson stood abruptly, walked to the window. Her shoulders shook beneath the faded sweatshirt. She is 10 years old. She still has nightmares about giving him up. If she saw... She will not. Edward's voice came out harder than intended. I am going to make sure of that. How? She turned, eyes wet but fierce. You said yourself these are powerful people. Money. Connections. What can one person do against that? Edward looked at the photographs on the wall. Emily's smile in every one. Tommy used to smile like that. Before, I used to think power meant money, he said slowly. Control. The ability to make things happen or make them disappear. He stood, walked to the window beside her. The parking lot below was quiet, just a cat picking its way between cars. But I have learned something these past few weeks. Real power is being willing to lose everything for what matters. Miss Patterson studied his face. Why do you care? You did not know Max. You do not know us. Edward was quiet for a long moment. The radiator clicked and hissed in the corner. I had a son. He died 7 years ago. He was the kind of kid who brought home every stray he found, every injured bird, every lost kitten. His voice caught. He pushed through. I spent 7 years trying to forget him, burying myself in work, building things that do not matter to people who do not care. And then I found Max in an alley, half dead, and I finally understood what my son was trying to teach me all along. What is that? That the measure of a person is not what they build. It is what they are willing to protect. Emily was asleep when they brought Shadow inside. The dog moved through the unfamiliar apartment with growing agitation, nose working overtime, tail beginning to wag. He knew this place, knew these smells, the lavender, the cookies, something else underneath that only a dog could remember. Miss Patterson opened a bedroom door. Shadow froze at the threshold. A small figure lay curled under a faded quilt decorated with stars and moons. Brown hair spread across the pillow. Posters of horses and dogs covering the walls. A nightlight shaped like a butterfly cast soft shadows. Shadow's whole body began to shake. Not with fear this time, with recognition. He limped forward, one careful step at a time, until he reached the bed. Then he lifted his head and placed his muzzle gently on the mattress, inches from the sleeping girl's face. And he waited. Edward watched from the doorway. His chest tight. This was Shadow's home. Shadow's person. He had known it would end this way. Had known since Sarah's first message, but knowing did not make it easier. Emily stirred. Her eyes fluttered open. She saw the dog's face in the darkness. Max! Her voice was thick with sleep, confused, then suddenly violently awake. Max! She threw her arms around the dog's neck, sobbing, and Shadow's tail went wild, his whole body wiggling with joy despite the injured leg. Miss Patterson was crying too, leaning against the doorframe, one hand pressed to her heart. Edward stepped back. Quiet? Invisible? This moment was not his. Later, after Emily had finally fallen asleep again with Shadow curled at her feet, Miss Patterson found Edward in the kitchen. You are giving him back to her. It was not a question. Edward nodded. He was always hers. But you love him too. I can see it. Edward said nothing. The kitchen clock ticked softly. The smell of those overcooked cookies still lingered. You could take him. We could not stop you. Legally, he has been abandoned. You would have every right. Some things are not about rights. Ms. Patterson poured 2 cups of coffee from a pot that had been sitting too long. Set one in front of him. The cups were mismatched, one with a faded flower pattern, one plain white. The people who hurt him. What are you going to do, whatever it takes, even if it costs you everything? Edward thought of his company, his reputation, the empire he had spent 35 years building. Then he thought of Emily's face when she saw her dog again. Some things are worth everything. He drove back to Hartfield alone. The back seat was empty. The silence pressed against him like a physical weight. The radio played old country songs, the kind his father used to listen to, but Edward barely heard them. His phone buzzed, another unknown number. "We know you went to Burlington. Last warning. Sterling. Back off, or the girl pays." Edward pulled over to the side of the road. Gravel crunched under the tires. His hands gripped the steering wheel. They were watching him, tracking his movements. This was bigger than a few rich kids covering up animal abuse. Someone was coordinating this, someone with resources, someone with a lot to lose. He thought back through the past weeks, Richard's visits, the board's sudden hostility, the speed with which his business relationships had crumbled. All of it orchestrated. But by whom? His phone buzzed again. This time, Sarah Mitchell. "Edward, the microchip company just contacted me. Someone requested all records related to Shadow's chip, claimed to be law enforcement. I checked. They were not." Edward stared at the message. Someone was digging into Shadow's history, looking for connections, for leverage. But they had made a mistake, left a trail, and trails could be followed in both directions. He typed a reply, "Can you get me the name of whoever made that request?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then Sarah's response, "Already did." "Edward, you are not going to believe this. The request came from inside your own company, from Richard Thornton's office." Richard Thornton's office. Edward sat in his car outside the empty estate. Engine off, headlights dark, 3 in the morning. The message from Sarah still glowing on his phone screen. 30 years. He had known Richard for 30 years. Given him his first real job when no one else would take a chance on a kid from the wrong side of town. Stood as best man at his wedding. Lent him $200,000 when his first business failed. Never asked for a penny back. And now this. Edward's jaw tightened until his teeth ached. It was not just betrayal. Betrayal he could understand. Business was full of betrayals, small and large. He had seen enough of them to fill a book. This was something else. Richard had used company resources to track Shadow, to find Emily, to build a weapon against a child. Why the Preston kid was Richard's nephew. That explained part of it. Family protecting family. But the coordination, the speed, the willingness to threaten a 10-year-old. There was more here. Something deeper. Edward pulled out his phone and made a call he had been avoiding for years. Mitchell Crane. "Mitch, it is Edward Sterling." Silence on the other end. Then a low whistle. "Ed Sterling. Been a long time. Heard you have been having some troubles. I need a favor. From a private investigator you have not spoken to in 8 years. From the best investigator I know." Another pause. Edward could hear ice clinking in a glass. The faint sound of a television in the background, some late-night talk show. "What kind of favor?" "I need everything you can find on Richard Thornton. Business dealings, personal accounts, connections, everything." "That is a big ask. Ed, Thornton has got friends in high places. So did I. Once." Mitch was quiet for a moment. The ice clinked again. "This about that dog thing I've been hearing about. It is about a lot more than a dog. Always is. More ice clinking. Give me 48 hours. The estate felt different without Shadow. Edward walked through the empty rooms, his footsteps echoing off marble floors. The grandfather clock ticked in the hallway. The chandelier cast cold light on cold stone. The blankets were still arranged in the corner of the ground floor room. A few strands of gray fur clung to the fabric. The room still smelled faintly of dog that warm, musky scent he had grown accustomed to. He did not clean them up. Margaret had left food in the refrigerator before she had gone. Neatly labeled containers, pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, the kind of food she used to make for Tommy. Edward stared at them without appetite. His phone buzzed. "Ms. Patterson. Emily has not stopped smiling since she woke up. Max will not leave her side. Thank you does not seem like enough." Attached was a photograph. Emily in her pajamas, arms wrapped around Shadow Max, both of them looking at the camera with identical expressions of pure contentment. The morning light caught them through a window, soft and golden. Edward studied the image for a long time. He had done the right thing. He knew that. So why did his chest feel like someone had carved out a piece of it? 2 days later, Mitch called back. "You sitting down? Ed?" Edward was standing in his study staring at Tommy's photograph. He had kept it face up since that night. The boy's smile seemed brighter somehow, or maybe Edward was just seeing it differently now. "Just tell me." "Richard Thornton has been skimming from the company for 6 years. Small amounts at first, then bigger. He has got an offshore account in the Caymans with close to $3 million in it." Edward's hand tightened on the phone. "How did I miss this? Because you trusted him, and because he is good at hiding things." Papers rustled on Mitch's end. "But here is where it gets interesting. The Preston family has been funneling money to Richard for the past 4 years. Regular payments, always in cash. For what? Near as I can tell, favorable zoning decisions, building permits pushed through, the usual corruption, small-town stuff, but the numbers add up." Edward closed his eyes. The Preston kid had not just happened to hurt Shadow. The families were connected, intertwined, protecting each other because exposing one would expose them all. "There is more," Mitch continued. "The Harrison family is involved too. And Ed, some of these transactions trace back to a development project you vetoed 3 years ago. The Millbrook Commons deal." Edward remembered. A proposed luxury housing development on protected wetlands. He had shut it down over environmental concerns. The town council had praised him. The newspapers had called him a hero. Richard had pushed hard for it. Unusually hard. Now he understood why. "They have been planning this for years," Edward said slowly. "Waiting for a chance to push me out. Looks that way. The dog thing just gave them an excuse." Edward opened his eyes, looked at Tommy's photograph, the boy who saved strays, the boy who never stopped believing his father could be better. "Daddy, it was hurt and nobody helped it, so I did." "Mitch, I need you to compile everything. Documents, account numbers, transaction records, all of it. What are you going to do with it? I am going to finish what they started." The board meeting was scheduled for Friday. Edward received the notice by certified mail. Formal, cold, the language of lawyers who had already decided the outcome. Emergency session to address matters of corporate governance and leadership transition. Leadership transition, they were going to vote him out. Strip him of the company he had built from nothing. 3 days. He had 3 days to decide what kind of man he wanted to be. Edward sat alone in his study. The notice spread before him on the desk. Outside, rain began to fall, drumming against the windows. He could fight. Mitch's evidence was damning. He could walk into that boardroom and blow everything apart. Expose Richard, the Prestons, the Harrisons, Burn it all down. But that would mean war. Legal battles that could drag on for years. Public scandals that would destroy reputations, including his own. The company torn apart by infighting. And for what? To protect his empire. He looked at Tommy's photograph again. The boy who saved strays, who never walked past anything suffering without stopping to help. What would Tommy think of his father now, fighting to hold on to money and power while a little girl in Burlington had just gotten her best friend back? My old man used to say that a man's character shows not in what he fights for, but in what he is willing to walk away from. I reckon I finally understand what he meant. Edward picked up his phone, scrolled to Miss Patterson's number. His thumb hovered over the call button. You want to do what? Miss Patterson's voice was sharp with disbelief. Edward sat on the floor of the empty room where Shadow used to sleep. The blankets still smelled faintly of dog. Rain streaked the windows. I want to set up a trust fund for Emily, for her education, whatever she needs. Mr. Sterling, that is incredibly generous, but I cannot accept. It is not charity, it is justice. Silence on the line. He could hear Emily laughing somewhere in the background, and the sound of Max barking. I do not understand. Edward leaned his head back against the wall. The plaster was cool through his shirt. I am about to lose my company. Everything I spent 35 years building, and I have realized something. What is that? None of it matters. Miss Patterson was quiet for a long moment. The rain outside grew heavier. The people who hurt Max, what is going to happen to them? I have evidence of their crimes. Fraud, bribery, corruption. Enough to send them to prison. Are you going to use it? Edward closed his eyes. The smart play was to use the evidence as leverage, force a settlement, protect his position, walk away with his fortune intact. That is what the old Edward Sterling would do. But the old Edward Sterling had slept alone in a 15,000-square-foot museum for 7 years, slowly suffocating under the weight of his own success. I am going to give it to the authorities, he said finally. All of it. And then I'm going to walk into that boardroom and resign. Resign. But you said, I know what I said, but I am tired of fighting for things that do not matter. What does matter? Edward opened his eyes, looked at the empty blankets, the gray fur still clinging to the fabric. Being the kind of person my son thought I was. Thursday night. Edward sat in his study, documents spread across the desk, Mitch's complete file, bank records, transaction logs, photographs, enough to destroy 5 families, including his own legacy. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. Mr. Sterling. A voice he did not recognize. Smooth, professional. I am calling on behalf of interested parties who would prefer this situation be resolved quietly. I am listening. $20 million. Deposited anywhere you choose. In exchange, the documents disappear. You retire gracefully. Everyone walks away. Edward looked at Tommy's photograph. The boy smiled back at him. Frozen forever at 8 years old. And Emily Patterson, the threats against her, withdrawn permanently. You have our word. $20 million, enough to disappear, start over, live comfortably for the rest of his life. All he had to do was let guilty men go free. No? The voice paused. I am sorry. I said no. The answer is no. Mr. Sterling, I do not think you understand the position you are in. Edward hung up. His hands were trembling. Not from fear, from something else entirely. The phone buzzed again immediately. Same number. He turned it off. Friday morning, Edward stood before his bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie. The same ritual he had performed thousands of times. But today felt different. Today he was not preparing for battle. He was preparing for surrender. The right kind of surrender. His phone turned back on, buzzed with a message from Mitch. Documents delivered to the district attorney's office. FBI field office in Burlington also received copies. It is done. Ed, no taking it back now. Edward read the message twice. No taking it back. He set down the phone and looked at his reflection. An old man stared back. Tired eyes, gray at the temples, lines around his mouth that had not been there a year ago. But something else, too. Something he had not seen in that mirror for 7 years. Peace. The boardroom was full when he arrived. 12 faces around the polished table. Richard at the far end, looking confident. His tie was silk, his cufflinks gold. The Prestons and Harrisons represented by their lawyers in expensive suits. Everyone expecting a fight. Edward took his seat at the head of the table. The leather creaked. The air smelled of coffee and cologne. Before we begin, Richard said, I want to state for the record that this proceeding, I am resigning. The words dropped like stones into still water. Richard's mouth hung open. The lawyers exchanged confused glances. Someone's pen clattered to the table. Effective immediately, Edward continued. I am stepping down as chairman and CEO. Ed, Richard recovered quickly, suspicion replacing surprise. What are you playing at? No games. Richard, I am done. He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a single sheet of paper. This is my formal resignation. I am also divesting my shares. The proceeds will go to a charitable foundation I am establishing. A foundation? Richard's voice was rising. Ed, what? For animal welfare and education funding for children from disadvantaged backgrounds. He slid the paper across the table. The company is yours. Richard, all of you, everything I built. Richard stared at the resignation letter like it might explode. This is insane. You are just giving up? Edward stood. I am choosing something better. He walked toward the door. Ed. Richard was on his feet now, face flushed. You cannot just walk away. There are questions, investigations. The authorities are... Edward stopped, turned. I know about the Cayman account. Richard, I know about the payments from the Prestons. I know about Millbrook Commons. The color drained from Richard's face. The FBI has copies of everything. He opened the door. Good luck explaining that to your lawyers. The elevator doors closed behind him. Edward leaned against the wall, heart pounding. It was done. 35 years of work, gone in 10 minutes. And he felt lighter than he had in decades. His phone buzzed. Miss Patterson, the news is everywhere. Are you okay? He typed back, better than okay. I am free. 2 hours later, Edward pulled into the driveway of a small apartment building in Burlington. Emily was waiting on the front steps. Shadow beside her. The afternoon sun caught them both, golden and warm. The dog saw him first, ears perked, tail beginning to wag. Then Emily was running toward the car, Shadow limping behind her as fast as his injured leg would allow. Mr. Sterling. Mr. Sterling. She skidded to a stop in front of him, breathless, eyes shining. Mom told me what you did. For Max. For us. Edward crouched down to her level. His knees protested, but he ignored them. Your dog saved me. Emily, not the other way around. She threw her arms around his neck. And for the first time in 7 years, Edward Sterling hugged a child and did not feel the grief trying to swallow him whole. Shadow pushed his way between them, tail wagging, tongue lapping at any available hand. He missed you, Emily said, laughing through tears. "He kept looking at the door." Edward scratched behind Shadow's ears. The fur was softer now, healthier. The dog smelled of shampoo and home. I missed him, too. Ms. Patterson appeared in the doorway, wiping her eyes. "Mr. Sterling, would you like to stay for supper?" Edward looked at Emily, still holding on to his sleeve, at Shadow, pressed against his leg, at the small, ordinary apartment that held more warmth than his mansion ever had. "Call me Edward," he said. "And yes, I would like that very much." But as he followed them inside, his phone buzzed one final time. A message from Mitch. "Ed, the FBI just made arrests. Richard, Preston Sr., Harrison. But there is something else. They found records we missed. Shadow was not the only animal those boys hurt. There were others, dozens, going back years." Edward stopped in the doorway. "And Ed, one of the other victims was traced back to a family in Hartfield. A little boy who lost his dog 6 years ago. His name was Tommy Sterling." The phone nearly slipped from Edward's fingers. Tommy's dog. His son had lost a dog 6 years ago. A stray mutt Tommy had found by the railroad tracks and nursed back to health over 3 weeks of patient care. Edward remembered the animal vaguely brown and white. Floppy ears. Always underfoot. Always following Tommy from room to room. One day, it was there. The next, it was gone. Tommy had been devastated. Searched the neighborhood for weeks. Put up flyers with his careful 8-year-old handwriting, "Lost dog, his name is Patches. Please bring him home." Edward had told him to move on. Get over it. It was just a dog. It was not just a dog. "Daddy, he was my friend." 3 months later, Tommy was dead. And Edward had never thought about that missing dog again. Until now. "Edward," Ms. Patterson's voice pulled him back. She stood in the doorway, concern creasing her forehead, the smell of supper meatloaf. He thought drifted from behind her. "Is everything okay?" He looked at her, at Emily peeking around her mother's hip, at Shadow sitting patiently, waiting, his tail making small, hopeful sweeps against the worn carpet. "I need to make a phone call," he said. "I will be right in." Mitch answered immediately. "Ed, you got my message. Tommy's dog." Edward's voice came out raw, scraped, like something dragged over gravel. "Are you sure? The records are clear. A mixed breed. Male, reported missing from the Sterling residence in Hartfield, 6 years ago. March, 2 weeks before the accident. What happened to it? Same pattern as the others. The boys Preston, Harrison, a few others who have since moved away. They targeted strays and pets from wealthy families. Some kind of sick game. Who could get away with the most?" Edward's free hand pressed flat against the wall. The painted surface felt cool beneath his palm. Solid. Real. "And Tommy's dog?" Mitch hesitated. "Ed, you do not need to know. Tell me." A long exhale on the other end. "They killed it. Buried it somewhere outside town. The records do not say where." Edward closed his eyes. Tommy had spent the last weeks of his life searching for that dog. Heartbroken. Confused. Wondering why his friend had abandoned him. And Edward had dismissed his grief, told him to toughen up. Be a man. It is just an animal. Tommy. There are more important things. The memory burned like acid in his throat. He stood outside the apartment for a long time. The autumn air carried the smell of wood smoke from somewhere nearby. A neighbor's chimney. Maybe. Leaves skittered across the parking lot. A child's laughter drifted from an open window down the street. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary life. But nothing felt ordinary anymore. 6 years ago, the same people who had beaten Shadow had killed Tommy's dog. His son had died not knowing what happened, carrying that small grief alongside all his bigger joys, and Edward had been too busy building an empire to notice any of it. The door opened behind him. "Edward." Miss Patterson stepped onto the porch. The evening light caught the gray at her temples. "Emily is asking about you. She wants to show you the drawings she made of Max." He turned to face her. Whatever she saw in his expression made her stop. What happened? "I just learned something," he said slowly. "About my son, about something I should have paid attention to a long time ago." She did not ask for details, just nodded. "Do you want to talk about it?" "Not yet." He looked past her, through the doorway, where Emily was kneeling on the floor with Shadow, arranging crayons by color. "Right now I want to see those drawings." Emily's artwork covered the refrigerator, Max running through a field of green crayon grass, Max sleeping on her bed, surrounded by pink hearts, Max wearing a crown, labeled King of Dogs in purple crayon. "This one is my favorite," Emily said, pointing to a picture of a stick figure holding hands with a large gray shape. "That is you and Max. I drew it yesterday." Edward studied the drawing. The stick figure had a triangle body and dots for eyes. Very serious dots. "You gave me a very nice suit," he said. Emily giggled. "That is not a suit. That is a cape. Because you are a superhero." "I am not a superhero, Emily." "Yes, you are." She said it with the absolute certainty of childhood. "You saved Max. That is what superheroes do." Edward looked at Shadow, who had settled beside Emily's knee, watching the conversation with calm attentiveness. "Max saved me too," he said quietly. "That makes him the real hero." Emily considered this with the seriousness of a judge weighing evidence. "Maybe you saved each other," she decided. "That is allowed." Supper was simple. Meatloaf with gravy, mashed potatoes from a box, green beans from a can, biscuits that came out slightly burned on the bottom. It was the best meal Edward had eaten in years. They sat around a small table in the kitchen, Shadow positioned strategically beneath, ready to catch any dropped crumbs. Emily talked constantly about school, about her friends, about the time Max had eaten her homework and she had to explain it to her teacher. "He really did eat it," she insisted when Edward raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Peterson did not believe me either, but it is true." Ms. Patterson, "Call me Karen," she had said, shook her head with fond exasperation. "She is not lying. I had to fish the soggy pieces out of his mouth." "In Max's defense," Edward said, "your homework probably tasted better than whatever they were feeding him on the street." Emily burst into giggles. Even Karen cracked a smile, and Edward felt something shift inside his chest. A weight he had not known he was carrying, lifting just slightly. This was what he had missed all those years. Not the board meetings or the acquisitions or the corner offices with views of the city. This simple food, simple laughter, simple connection. Tommy had understood that instinctively, had tried to share it with every wounded creature he brought home. Edward had been too blind to see. After supper, Emily begged to stay up late. "Please, Mom, Mr. Edward just got here." "It is a school night, sweetheart." "But your mom is right," Edward said. "Besides, I will come back, if that is okay." Emily's face lit up. "Really? You promise?" "I promise." She threw her arms around his waist in a fierce hug. Then she hugged Shadow, whispered something in his ear, and ran toward her bedroom. Karen watched her go with soft eyes. "She has not been this happy since before the divorce," she said quietly. "Thank you." "You are thanking me. I disrupted your entire evening. You gave my daughter her best friend back." Karen began clearing plates, the dishes clinking gently. "That is worth 1,000 disrupted evenings." Edward helped carry dishes to the sink. Domestic, ordinary, strange in its unfamiliarity. "Can I ask you something?" Karen said. "Of course. The phone call earlier. The thing about your son." She did not look at him, focused on rinsing a plate. The water ran warm, steam rising. "You do not have to tell me, but if you need someone to listen, Edward was quiet for a moment. The kitchen faucet dripped. The refrigerator hummed. Then he told her about Tommy, about the dog that disappeared, about the connection to the same people who had hurt Shadow, about 7 years of running from grief instead of facing it. Karen set down the dish she was washing and turned to face him. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "I am so sorry. I failed him." The words that came out before Edward could stop them. "He needed me to pay attention, to take his pain seriously, and I told him to get over it. 2 weeks later, he was gone." "You did not kill your son." "Edward." "No, but I did not really see him either. Not the way he deserved to be seen." Shadow padded into the kitchen and pressed against Edward's leg. The dog's warmth seeped through his trouser fabric. "You see him now," Karen said softly. "That is what matters." Edward drove back to Hartfield that night. The estate was dark, empty. Margaret's absence felt like a physical presence, like a hole in the air where something should be. He walked through the silent rooms, footsteps echoing on marble. The grandfather clock had stopped. He had forgotten to wind it. The silence was absolute. In his study, Tommy's photograph still sat face up on the desk. Edward picked it up. "I found out about Patches," he said to the image. "I know what happened to him." The boy in the photograph kept smiling. 8 years old, innocent, gone. "I am sorry I did not listen. I am sorry I told you it did not matter." His voice cracked. "Everything you cared about mattered. Every stray, every injured bird, every lost soul you tried to save." He set the photograph down gently. "I'm going to try to be more like you. Son, better late than never. Is that not what you always said?" Monday morning, Edward met with the FBI. The investigation was expanding. Richard, Preston Sr., and Harrison were in custody. More names were emerging, a network of corruption that had infected Hartfield's elite for over a decade. "We have recovered records of at least 47 animals," Agent Collins said. Spreading photographs across the table. "Strays, family pets, shelter rescues, the pattern goes back at least 8 years." Edward looked at the photographs. Dogs, cats, a rabbit, all of them victims of bored, wealthy young men with too much money and not enough conscience. What happens now? Federal charges, animal cruelty, conspiracy, racketeering. The corruption angle adds RICO violations. Collins leaned back. "These families are facing serious prison time." "Good." Collins studied him. "You gave up a lot to make this happen. Mr. Sterling, your company, your position, most people would have taken the buyout?" Edward thought of Tommy, of Shadow, of Emily's drawing on the refrigerator. Most people do not get a second chance to do the right thing. He was walking to his car when his phone buzzed. "Karen." "Edward, something is wrong. Shadow collapsed this morning. We are at the emergency vet. Emily is hysterical." Edward's keys slipped from his fingers and clattered on the asphalt. He bent to retrieve them, hands suddenly unsteady. "The vet says it might be related to his old injuries. Internal damage they could not see before. They are running tests now." Edward was already in the car. Engine starting. "Please come. Emily keeps asking for you." He pulled out of the parking lot, heart hammering against his ribs. Not now. Not after everything. Not when they had finally found each other. The drive to Burlington had never felt longer. Traffic crawled. Every red light lasted an eternity. Edward's fingers drummed against the steering wheel. His mind raced through possibilities. Complications from the surgery, hidden internal bleeding, organ damage from the beating that had not shown up on initial scans. Shadow had been healing so well, walking more steadily every day, playing with Emily in the yard. But trauma did not always announce itself. Sometimes it waited, lurked in the shadows. His phone buzzed again. Karen. They are taking him into emergency surgery. The vet says there is a tear in his intestine. Old injury that suddenly ruptured. Edward's foot pressed harder on the accelerator. Edward? She says the next few hours are critical. He might not make it. The veterinary hospital smelled of antiseptic and fear. Edward burst through the automatic doors, still in the suit he had worn to the FBI meeting. His tie hung loose, his hair, usually immaculate, stuck up at odd angles from running his hands through it during the drive. Karen stood in the waiting area, arms wrapped around Emily, who was sobbing into her mother's chest. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in harsh white. Where is he? Karen looked up. Her face was pale, eyes red-rimmed. Surgery. They have been in there for over an hour. Emily lifted her head. Tears streaked her cheeks, snot running from her nose. Mr. Edward. Her voice broke on his name. Max was playing, and then he just fell down, and there was blood, and he was crying, and she dissolved into fresh sobs. Edward knelt beside her, his expensive trousers pressing into the linoleum floor. Hey, hey. He did not know what to say. What could anyone say? The doctors are doing everything they can. But what if they cannot fix him? Emily's words came out in hiccups. What if he dies? He just came back. He just came back, and now... She buried her face in Edward's shoulder. He held her, this small, trembling child who had already lost so much. Her father to divorce, her dog to cruelty, and now, possibly, again, over Emily's head. He met Karen's eyes. What did the vet say exactly? The beating damaged his intestines. Scar tissue formed around the injury, but it was weak. When he was running today, something tore. Is it fixable? Karen's jaw tightened. She said they will not know until they get inside. The minutes crawled. Edward sat in a plastic chair. Emily curled against his side, exhausted from crying. Karen paced the length of the waiting room, back and forth, back and forth. Her shoes squeaked on the linoleum with each turn. Other people came and went. A woman with a cat carrier. A man holding a limping beagle. Normal emergencies. Normal fears. None of them knew that a dog named Shadow Max was fighting for his life somewhere beyond those swinging doors. Edward's phone buzzed. Mitch. He ignored it. Another buzz. His lawyer. Ignored. Nothing else mattered right now. Nothing but the little girl pressed against him and the dog who had saved them both. 2 hours. Then 3. Emily fell asleep, her face puffy and blotched. Karen finally stopped pacing and slumped into a chair, head in her hands. Edward stared at the ceiling tiles, counted them, lost count, started over. He had built a fortune by controlling outcomes, by anticipating problems and solving them before they materialized, by never leaving anything to chance. And now he sat in a vinyl chair, powerless, waiting to find out if a dog would live or die. You cannot control everything, Daddy. Tommy's voice, clear as if his son stood beside him. Some things you just have to trust. Edward closed his eyes. He had not prayed in years, had not seen the point after Tommy died. What kind of God took an 8-year-old boy and left his father behind to suffer? But now, in the harsh, fluorescent light of a veterinary waiting room, with a sleeping child pressed against him. He found words forming in his mind, not demands, not bargains, just a simple request. Please. Not for me. For her. The doors swung open. A woman in surgical scrubs emerged, mask pulled down around her neck. Dr. Reyes, according to her name tag. Sweat dampened her hairline. Edward's heart stopped. Karen was on her feet instantly. How is he? Dr. Reyes pulled off her cap, revealing sweat-dampened hair. He is alive. Edward felt Emily jerk awake beside him. We repaired the intestinal tear. There was more damage than we anticipated, old trauma that had scarred over badly. We had to remove a section of bowel. But he will be okay. Emily's voice was high. Desperate. Dr. Reyes hesitated. That hesitation hit Edward like a physical blow. The surgery was successful, but the next 48 hours are critical. If infection sets in, if his body does not handle the trauma well. She spread her hands. He is a fighter. That is clear. But I cannot make any promises. Emily started crying again. Karen knelt beside her, murmuring comfort. But her eyes stayed on the doctor. Can we see him? He is still under anesthesia, but yes, briefly, one at a time. Emily looked at Edward. You go first, she said. Surprising him. You found him. You should see him first. The recovery room was small and dim. Shadow lay on a padded table, an IV line running into his front leg, a cone around his neck. His abdomen was shaved and stitched, a line of black thread against pale skin. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. Edward stood in the doorway, unable to move. This was the dog he had found in an alley, half dead, ready to give up. This was the dog who had taught him how to feel again, and now here he lay, fighting the same battle all over again. Edward's legs gave out. He sat down hard on the cold tile floor, back against the wall, facing the table where Shadow lay unconscious. His hands began to shake, then his shoulders, then everything. I am sorry. The words came out cracked, broken. I am sorry I could not protect you. I am sorry this world is so cruel. He pulled his knees to his chest like a child. I am sorry I could not protect Tommy either, or his dog, or any of them. Tears ran down his face. He did not wipe them away. I built an empire, and I could not save a single innocent thing. That was how Karen found him, 58 years old, former billionaire. The man they had called the Stone. Sitting on the floor of a veterinary recovery room, crying like his heart was breaking, because it was. She did not say anything, just sat down beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. They stayed like that for a long time. The machines beeped. Shadow's chest rose and fell. Finally, Karen spoke. When my marriage ended, I thought I had failed at the only thing that mattered, being a wife, being a family. Edward did not respond, could not. I spent months feeling like I should have tried harder, done more, been better. She paused. But you know what I learned? He shook his head. Sometimes things break no matter how hard you try to hold them together, and sometimes that breaking is what makes room for something new. Edward looked at Shadow, still motionless on the table. What if there is nothing new? What if it just keeps breaking? Karen was quiet for a moment. The IV drip clicked softly. Then you keep putting the pieces back together, as many times as it takes. Emily came in next. She climbed onto a chair beside the table and took Shadow's paw in her small hand. Hey, Max, she whispered. It is me. I am here. No response, just the steady beep of the heart monitor. Remember when I first got you? You were so little. And scared. You hid under my bed for 3 whole days. Her thumb stroked his fur. But I waited. I brought you food and talked to you through the bed skirt. And eventually, you came out. She leaned closer. So you have to come out again. Okay, I will wait. I am really good at waiting. Her voice cracked. Please, Max. Please, do not leave me again. They kept a vigil through the night, taking turns sitting with Shadow, bringing each other coffee from the vending machine, bitter and lukewarm. But warm. Not talking much, but not needing to. Around 3 a.m., Edward went outside for air. The parking lot was empty except for his car and Karen's. Streetlights cast orange pools on the asphalt. A cool breeze carried the smell of rain coming. He walked to the edge of the lot, where a strip of grass bordered a drainage ditch. His Italian leather shoes sank into the soft earth. He did not notice, just stood there, looking up at the stars, thinking about all the ways a life could go wrong. His phone buzzed again. He pulled it out, ready to silence it. But the notification was not from Mitch or his lawyer. It was a news alert. Breaking: Richard Thornton released on bail. Sources say he has vowed to clear his name and expose the truth about Edward Sterling. Edward stared at the screen, released, on bail, and coming for him. A sound behind him. Footsteps on grass. He turned. A figure stood at the edge of the parking lot, silhouetted against the streetlight. Hello, Edward? Richard's voice. Edward's phone slipped from his fingers into the mud. We need to talk. Richard stepped closer. He looked different. Disheveled. 3 days of stubble shadowing his jaw. His shirt was wrinkled, tie missing. The expensive cologne was gone, replaced by the sour smell of sweat and sleeplessness. Nothing like the polished executive Edward had known for 30 years. You destroyed me. Richard's voice was low, controlled. But something simmered beneath the surface. Everything I built, my reputation, my family's legacy. You destroyed yourself. Richard, I just showed people the truth. The truth? Richard laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. The truth is that I did what everyone in this town does. I played the game. The only difference is I got caught. The difference is you hurt innocent creatures. Animals. A child's pet. Oh, please, Richard waved dismissively. You are not really upset about some stray dogs. This is about power. It has always been about power. Edward felt the mud seeping into his shoes. Cold, wet. You do not understand anything. I understand that you have thrown away everything, your company, your fortune, your position for what a dog, a little girl you barely know. Richard stepped closer still, close enough that Edward could smell whiskey on his breath. You have lost your mind. Ed, everyone is saying it. The great Edward Sterling, brought down by sentimentality. Edward looked at this man he had called a friend for 3 decades, and felt nothing but pity. I have not lost my mind. Richard, I have found it. For the first time in years. Richard's face contorted. You sanctimonious! He shoved Edward, hard. Edward stumbled backward, feet slipping in the wet grass, his arms pinwheeled. For one suspended moment, he teetered on the edge of the drainage ditch. Then he fell. The water was shallow but cold, maybe 2 feet deep. He landed on his back, muddy water flooding over him, soaking his suit, filling his nose and mouth. He sputtered, trying to rise, but his hands sank into the soft muck at the bottom. The smell of rotting leaves and stagnant water filled his nostrils. Richard stood at the edge, looking down. Look at you, the mighty Edward Sterling, wallowing in a ditch like the pig you always were. Edward struggled to sit up. Mud coated his face, his hair, his clothes. He could taste it earthy, rotten, foul. You think you are better than me." Richard's voice rose. "You think giving away your money makes you a saint? You are nothing, Ed, nothing without your empire. Just a sad old man crying over dogs." Edward finally got his feet under him, stood up, dripping, in the middle of the ditch. He looked at Richard. Then, slowly, deliberately, he wiped the mud from his face. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but at least I can still look at myself in the mirror." Richard's face went purple. "You will regret this. I swear. You will regret—" "Hey!" Karen's voice cut through the night. She stood at the entrance of the parking lot, phone in hand. "I have called the police. They are on their way." Richard glanced at her. Back at Edward, the rage in his eyes flickered, replaced by something calculating. "This is not over," he said. Then he turned and walked into the darkness. Karen helped Edward out of the ditch. He stood in the parking lot, shivering, covered in mud, looking like something dragged from a swamp. His shoes squelched with every step. Water dripped from his suit jacket, forming puddles on the asphalt. "Are you okay?" Edward looked down at himself, his ruined suit, his filthy shoes, his shaking hands. Then, incredibly, he laughed, a real laugh, deep and genuine and slightly hysterical. "I think this is the most honest I have looked in 30 years. Karen stared at him, then she started laughing too. They stood there in the empty parking lot, laughing like fools, while sirens wailed in the distance. The police took Edward's statement, assault, harassment, possible witness intimidation. Richard had made a very large mistake by the time the officers left. Dawn was breaking over Burlington. Pink and gold streaked the sky. Edward stood outside the veterinary hospital, still wearing his mud-caked clothes the staff had offered scrubs, but he had declined watching the sky turn light. Karen appeared beside him. "Dr. Reyes wants to see you." Edward's stomach dropped. They walked back inside together. The antiseptic smell hit him again, familiar now. Dr. Reyes met them in the hallway, her face unreadable. "The 48-hour window I mentioned." Edward nodded, barely breathing. "We are 12 hours in, and—" She paused. His heart stopped. "He is awake, and he is asking for you." "Asking? Well—" A small smile cracked her professional mask. "Whining. Persistently, we think he knows you are here." Edward's legs felt weak. "Can I see him?" "Yes, but Mr. Sterling," he stopped. "You might want to wash off some of that mud first. We do have sanitation standards." 15 minutes later, freshly scrubbed and wearing borrowed scrubs, Edward entered the recovery room. Shadow's eyes were open. They tracked Edward as he crossed the room, and the dog's tail weakly, barely began to wag. "Hey, boy," Edward's voice came out thick. "I hear you have been making a fuss." Shadow's tail wagged harder. Edward sat beside the table, eye level with the dog. "You scared us. You know that Emily has been worried sick." At Emily's name, Shadow's ears perked slightly. "She is sleeping right now, but she will be here when you are strong enough for visitors." Shadow's nose stretched toward Edward's hand. Gently, so gently. Edward placed his palm against the dog's head. "You keep fighting. You hear me? We are not done yet." Shadow closed his eyes, leaning into the touch, and Edward felt something he had not felt in 7 years. Hope, real hope, not the brittle kind that breaks at the first impact, but something deeper, stronger, something worth building a life around. He was still sitting there when Karen peeked through the door. "Edward, there is someone here to see you." "Who?" Karen's expression was strange, uncertain. "She says her name is Margaret, and she says it is urgent." Margaret stood in the waiting room, clutching her purse with both hands. She looked older than Edward remembered, more fragile. The gray in her hair seemed whiter now. Her shoulders slightly stooped. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she had not slept in days. "Mr. Sterling," her voice wavered. "I am sorry to come here. I know I said I could not stay, but there is something you need to know." Edward glanced at Karen, who nodded and stepped back to give them space. The waiting room was quiet now, just the hum of the vending machine and the distant sound of a phone ringing at the reception desk. "What is it?" "Margaret." The old woman's hands trembled on her purse strap. "It is about Tommy, about what really happened to his dog." Edward went still. "I already know. The FBI found records." "No." Margaret shook her head. "You do not know everything, because I never told you." She looked up at him, and tears spilled down her weathered cheeks. "I saw them. Mr. Sterling, the boys. I saw them take Patches." The world tilted. Edward reached for the wall, steadying himself. The fluorescent light seemed too bright suddenly. The antiseptic smell too sharp. "What do you mean? You saw them?" Margaret's face crumpled. "It was 6 years ago. March. Tommy was at school. I was in the garden, pruning the roses by the back fence. And I saw them, Richard's nephew and 2 others, climbing over." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "They had treats. They were calling the dog. Patches went right to them, trusted them. Wagged his tail the whole way." Edward's legs felt hollow. "Why did you not say anything?" "I was scared." The words came out ragged, torn from somewhere deep. "Richard Thornton was your best friend. His family was powerful, and I thought I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe they were just playing, taking the dog for a walk." She pressed a hand to her mouth. "But then Patches never came back, and Tommy was so heartbroken, and I knew what I had seen. But I was too much of a coward to speak up." Edward stared at her. 20 years of loyalty, 20 years of service, and she had been carrying this secret the entire time. "Does Richard know that you saw?" Margaret nodded miserably. "He came to me after you started asking questions about Shadow, said if I kept quiet, nothing would happen to my sister, said he had protected me all these years. And I owed him. Protected you. From you." Her eyes met his. "He said you would fire me if you knew I had seen something and did not report it, that you would blame me for Tommy's grief." Edward felt sick. Richard had used Margaret's fear against her, had turned her into an unwitting accomplice, had built his web of silence one strand at a time. "Margaret," his voice came out harder than intended, "why are you telling me now?" She straightened slightly, some of the old dignity returning to her posture. "Because last night I watched the news. I saw what they did to you. The things they said." She swallowed. "And I realized that staying silent made me just as guilty as them." Her hands finally released the purse strap. "I am ready to tell the police everything, whatever it takes to make this right." They sat in the hospital cafeteria, cups of cold coffee between them. Edward had called Agent Collins. The FBI wanted Margaret's statement, another piece of the puzzle clicking into place, but that was for later. Right now, he needed to understand. 6 years, he said quietly. "You carried this for 6 years." Margaret stared at her untouched coffee. The steam had long since stopped rising. "Every day, every single day since Tommy died. I've thought about it. Wondered if maybe if I had said something sooner, things might have been different." "Different how?" She looked up at him. "Tommy was so sad about Patches. He was not himself those last 2 weeks. Distracted, upset, not paying attention to things around him." Her voice cracked. What if that is why he was not paying attention when he crossed the street? What if Patches was still on his mind when that car— She could not finish. Edward sat very still. He had never considered it, never connected Tommy's grief over the dog to the accident that killed him. But Margaret had, for 6 years. She had wondered if her silence had contributed to a child's death. The weight of that guilt was written in every line of her face. Margaret— He waited until she looked at him. Tommy's death was not your fault. But if I had— It was not your fault, he said it firmly. It was not my fault either, though I spent 7 years believing it was. The only people responsible are the ones who chose to do harm. Margaret's tears flowed freely now, cutting tracks through the powder on her cheeks. I am so sorry, Mr. Sterling. I am so sorry I did not protect him. Edward reached across the table and took her hand. Her skin was papery, thin with age. These were the hands that had bandaged Tommy's scraped knees, that had baked cookies for his birthday parties, that had held him when he cried over wounded animals. You loved my son, Edward said. That is not something that needs forgiveness. Karen found them an hour later. Shadow is improving. Dr. Reyes thinks he has passed the worst of it. Edward closed his eyes briefly, relief washing through him. And Emily, sleeping in the waiting room. She would not go home. He nodded. That sounded like Emily. Margaret stood, smoothing her skirt with nervous hands. I should go. The FBI agent said he would meet me at the Hartfield station. I will drive you, Edward said. No. She shook her head. You need to be here. With that dog. With that little girl. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. Tommy would have liked them both. Edward stood and, surprising them both, hugged her. She stiffened at first, then her arms came up around him, and she held on tight. She smelled of lavender soap and peppermint, the same scents from his childhood. From the kitchen where she had always been working when he came home from school. Thank you, he murmured, for finally telling the truth. Thank you, she whispered back, for not hating me. The day passed in fragments, Shadow growing stronger, lifting his head when visitors entered. Emily reading to him from a book about brave dogs. Her voice steady now. Karen bringing sandwiches no one really ate but appreciated anyway. And Edward sitting quietly in the corner, watching it all. His phone buzzed constantly. News outlets wanting statements, lawyers with updates, former colleagues expressing shock or satisfaction at his fall from grace. He ignored them all. Around midday, Agent Collins called. Margaret's statement is extremely valuable. It corroborates the timeline and implicates Richard Thornton directly in the original cover-up. What happens now? His bail will likely be revoked. Between the assault charges from last night and this new evidence, he's looking at serious time. Edward felt nothing. No satisfaction. No triumph. Just a hollow kind of completion. There is something else, Collins continued. We have located records suggesting the boys were not acting alone. There was an adult who organized these hunting parties, provided locations, covered tracks afterward. Who? We are still confirming. But the evidence points to someone inside your company, someone who has been protecting these kids for years. The line went silent. I will be in touch, Collins said, and hung up. That evening, Emily insisted on eating supper in Shadow's room. Dr. Reyes allowed it, unofficially, after Emily promised to be careful around the IV lines. They sat on the floor, Edward, Karen, and Emily eating takeout from the diner down the street while Shadow watched from his recovery table. The room smelled of antiseptic and French fries. He looks better, Emily said through a mouthful of burger. His eyes are more sparkly. Sparkly? Edward raised an eyebrow. You know what I mean. She pointed a French fry at him. When he is happy, his eyes get sparkly. When he is sad, they go flat." Edward looked at Shadow. The dog's tail thumped weakly against the table. "I think I see what you mean," Emily beamed. Later, after Emily had fallen asleep curled up in a chair, Karen sat beside Edward in the hallway. "What are you going to do now?" she asked quietly. After all this is over, Edward considered the question. A month ago, his identity had been built on concrete foundations: Sterling Industries, the Hartfield estate, 35 years of accumulated power and prestige. Now, all of that was gone, stripped away like old paint revealing bare wood beneath. And somehow, impossibly, he felt more himself than he had in years. "I am going to sell the estate," he said slowly. "Whatever is left after the legal fees. I want to use it to help animals, dogs like Shadow, maybe start a sanctuary. In Tommy's memory, in Tommy's honor." The distinction mattered. He understood something I did not, that every living thing deserves someone who cares whether it lives or dies. Karen was quiet for a moment. The hallway clock ticked softly. "That is a beautiful idea. It is a start." He looked at her. "I was also thinking, the sanctuary would need staff, people who understand what these animals have been through." Karen's eyes widened slightly. "Are you offering me a job?" "I am offering you a partnership. You and Emily, a fresh start for all of us." She stared at him. "We barely know each other. I know that your daughter has more compassion in her little finger than most adults have in their whole bodies. I know that you raised her alone and did a remarkable job. I know that you welcomed a stranger into your home because he helped your dog." He paused. "I know that you sat with me on a cold floor while I fell apart, and you did not judge me or try to fix me. You just stayed." Karen's eyes glistened. "That is not a lot to build a partnership on. It is more than I have had in 7 years. His phone buzzed. A text from Mitch. "Ed, just got word from my FBI contact. They identified the adult organizer behind the hunting parties. You are not going to believe this." Edward's stomach tightened. Another buzz. It was someone who had access to the Sterling estate. Someone who knew which families had pets worth targeting. Someone who has been playing both sides for over a decade. A third buzz. "Ed, it was your lawyer, James Crawford. He has been Richard's silent partner the whole time." Edward's blood went cold. James Crawford, the man who had handled Tommy's estate, who had helped Edward rewrite his will after the accident, who had had access to every detail of Edward's personal and professional life for 20 years. The man Edward had trusted with everything. His phone buzzed one final time, and Ed Crawford was the one who recommended Margaret for the housekeeper position in the first place. She was never supposed to see anything. But when she did, Crawford made sure Richard kept her quiet. They have been using her fear to protect themselves this whole time. Edward looked up from his phone. Karen was watching him, concern on her face. "What is it?" Before he could answer, his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered, "Mr. Sterling?" A familiar voice, smooth, professional, the voice of a man he had trusted for 2 decades. James Crawford. "I hear you have been busy, making accusations, ruining reputations." Edward gripped the phone tighter. "It is over, James. The FBI knows everything." A pause. "Does it? Though does it know about the documents I have, the ones that prove you knew about Tommy's dog all along, that you covered it up to protect your business interests? That is a lie. Lies are just truths that have not been verified yet." Crawford's voice dripped with false sympathy. "I wonder what the FBI would think if those documents suddenly appeared. What little Emily would think if she learned her hero was just as guilty as the rest of us. Edward's hand shook. What do you want? A meeting. Tonight. The old warehouse on Maple Street in Hartfield. Come alone, or those documents go public. The line went dead. Edward stared at the phone. Crawford was bluffing. He had to be. There were no documents because there was nothing to document. But bluffs could still cause damage, could still poison Emily's image of him, could still derail everything. He looked at Shadow through the window, at Emily sleeping in her chair, at Karen watching him with worried eyes. Everything he had built in these past weeks, everything good and real and true. Crawford wanted to burn it all down, and Edward had to decide whether to let him. Edward did not go alone. He called Agent Collins from the hospital parking lot, told him everything. The meeting location, the threats, Crawford's attempted blackmail. We will have agents in position, Collins said. But Sterling, you do not have to do this. We can bring Crawford in without putting you at risk. He will destroy those fake documents if he thinks he is cornered. I need him to believe he has won. A pause on the line. You understand what you are walking into? Edward looked back at the hospital. The lights in Shadow's room were still on. I've spent 7 years hiding from difficult things. I am done hiding. The warehouse on Maple Street had been abandoned for a decade. Edward remembered when it was a furniture factory. His father had bought chairs there when Edward was a boy. Now the windows were broken, the loading docks rusted, the parking lot cracked and overgrown with weeds pushing through asphalt. He pulled up at 11 p.m., cut the engine, sat in the darkness. Somewhere in the shadows, FBI agents were watching, listening, ready, but right now, in this moment, Edward was alone. He got out of the car. The night air smelled of rain and decay. His footsteps crunched on broken glass as he walked toward the side entrance Crawford had specified. The door hung open, hinges screaming as he pushed through. Inside, a single work light illuminated a cleared space amid the rubble. James Crawford stood at its center, briefcase in hand, looking as polished as if he were arriving at a board meeting. Edward, punctual as always. Let us get this over with, Crawford smiled. It did not reach his eyes. Straight to business. I always admired that about you. He set the briefcase on an overturned crate. Though I must say, these past few weeks have revealed a sentimental side I never knew existed. The documents. James? Patience. Crawford opened the briefcase, withdrawing a manila folder. You know, I've spent 20 years managing your affairs, your trusts, your acquisitions, your charitable donations. I know every secret you have ever tried to bury. I do not have secrets. Everyone has secrets. Edward, the question is whether they are worth protecting. He held up the folder. These documents suggest you were aware of the harassment campaign against local pets as early as 5 years ago, that you chose to ignore it to preserve your business relationships. That is fabricated. Of course it is. Crawford's smile widened. But fabrications become facts when enough people believe them, and after your recent, instability, who do you think the public will trust? A disgraced businessman who threw away his empire for a dog, or a respected attorney with decades of impeccable service? Edward's jaw tightened. What do you want? I want you to recant your statements to the FBI, claim you were mistaken, confused, grieving. Crawford tilted his head. A temporary break from reality. Perhaps it happens to men your age. And if I refuse, then Emily Patterson learns that the man she calls a superhero knew about the torture of animals, including her beloved Max, and did nothing. Edward felt cold rage building in his chest. You would traumatize a child to save yourself. I would do what is necessary to protect my interests, as would anyone with sense. Crawford tucked the folder back into the briefcase. You have 48 hours to make your statement. After that, these documents find their way to every media outlet in New England. He snapped the briefcase shut. It has been a pleasure doing business with you. Edward, as always. He turned to leave. James? Crawford paused. You forgot something. Edward reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The screen showed an active recording and a live connection to Agent Collins. The FBI has been listening to every word. Crawford's face went white. That is inadmissible. Entrapment. It is not entrapment when you voluntarily confess to blackmail, evidence tampering, and conspiracy. Edward's voice was steady. You taught me that. 20 years ago, first week we worked together. Footsteps echoed through the warehouse. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness. James Crawford. Agent Collins emerged from the shadows. Badge visible. You are under arrest. Crawford's polished composure shattered. You cannot do this. I have connections. You have the right to remain silent. Collins nodded to his agents. Get him out of here. They led Crawford away, still sputtering threats and promises. Edward stood alone in the pool of light, listening to the sound of car doors and engines fading into the night. It was over. Finally, truly over. Dawn was breaking when he returned to the hospital. Karen met him at the entrance, coffee in hand, worry lines creasing her forehead. Collins called. He told me what happened. I'm sorry I did not tell you before I left. You should be. She handed him the coffee. But I understand why you did it. They walked inside together. Emily is still sleeping. Shadow has been restless, though I think he knew something was wrong. Edward smiled, despite his exhaustion. Dogs always know. Shadow was awake when Edward entered the recovery room. The dog's ears perked up, and his tail began its familiar weak wag, but there was something else in his eyes now. Recognition. Trust. Love. Edward sat beside the table and let Shadow sniff his hand. We got them, boy, all of them. They cannot hurt anyone else. Shadow's tongue licked his fingers. And you are going to be okay. Dr. Reyes says a few more days, and you can go home. Home. The word felt different now, smaller and bigger at the same time. Not a 15,000-square-foot mansion with 27 empty rooms. Something else. Something real. 3 days later, Shadow was released. Emily insisted on carrying him to the car, though he was far too heavy for her small arms. Edward helped, supporting most of the weight while Emily held his head. Careful of his stitches, Karen warned. I know. Mom, I am being careful. They settled Shadow into the back seat, where a nest of blankets waited. Emily climbed in beside him, one hand resting protectively on his side. Edward stood by the car door, suddenly uncertain. So, he said, what happens now? Karen looked at him. What do you mean? I mean, where do we go from here? I have made you a lot of promises. The sanctuary, the partnership, a fresh start. He paused. But I am not exactly a safe bet anymore. No company, no fortune, just a disgraced billionaire with a lot of enemies. Karen considered this for a moment. Then she opened the passenger door. Get in the car. Edward. But you asked what happens now. What happens now is we drive to Burlington, order too much pizza, and figure out the rest together. She smiled. That is how fresh starts work. One step at a time. Edward looked at Emily in the back seat, whispering to Shadow, at Karen, holding the door open, waiting, at the future he had never expected to have. He got in the car. 6 months later, the Sterling Animal Sanctuary opened its doors. It sat on 50 acres of Vermont countryside, funded by the sale of Edward's estate and a surprising flood of donations from people who had followed his story. The main building was modest, a converted barn with heated kennels and a small veterinary clinic. Sarah Mitchell had agreed to serve as head veterinarian, Margaret. Her name cleared, and her conscience finally at peace, managed the office. And in a small cottage at the edge of the property lived Edward, Karen, Emily, and Shadow. The dog had recovered fully, though he walked with a permanent limp. It did not slow him down. He spent his days patrolling the sanctuary, greeting new arrivals, calming frightened animals with his steady presence. Emily called him the Welcome Committee. On the anniversary of the sanctuary's opening, Edward walked through the kennels, Shadow at his side, 23 dogs, 14 cats, a blind horse named Chester, 2 goats that had been rescued from a hoarding situation, all of them saved, all of them healing. He stopped at a corner kennel where a new arrival huddled in the back, a German Shepherd mix, young, thin, terrified of human contact. "This one came in yesterday," Sarah said, joining him. "Found under a highway overpass. Signs of prolonged abuse. Will not let anyone near her." Edward crouched down, keeping his distance. The dog watched him with familiar eyes. Empty. Hopeless. Ready to give up. "What is her name? We are calling her Hope." Seemed appropriate. Edward smiled. "Hello, Hope?" he said softly. "I know you are scared. I know you think no one cares whether you live or die." The dog's ears twitched. "But you are wrong about that. Someone cares, a lot of someone's, actually." Shadow pressed against Edward's leg, watching the new arrival with calm interest. "You see this old fellow? He was just like you once, beaten, abandoned, left for dead in an alley." Hope's nose twitched. "And now, look at him, fat and happy and bossing everyone around." Shadow's tail wagged, as if he understood. "So, here's the deal," Edward continued. "You can stay scared as long as you need to. We are not going anywhere. And when you are ready, whenever that is, we will be here." He stood slowly, joints protesting. Hope did not move. But her eyes, Edward noticed, had lost just a fraction of their emptiness. It was a start. That evening, Edward sat on the porch of the cottage, watching the sun set over the sanctuary. Emily was doing homework at the kitchen table, complaining loudly about fractions. Karen was making supper, her laughter drifting through the open window. Shadow lay at Edward's feet, head on his paws, eyes half closed in contentment. Inside his pocket, Edward's phone held a photograph he looked at every day. Tommy, 8 years old, holding a kitten, smiling that gap-toothed smile. "I think you would like it here, son," he said quietly. "All these animals, all these second chances." Shadow's ear twitched at the sound of his voice. "I finally understand what you were trying to teach me. It just took me a while to catch up." The last of the sunlight faded, and the first stars appeared. Edward stayed on the porch. Shadow warm against his feet, listening to the sounds of his strange new family inside. Not perfect, not what he had planned, but exactly what he needed. Later that night, after Emily was in bed and Karen was reading by the fire, Edward walked to the kennels one last time. Hope was still in her corner, but her head was up now, watching him through the chain link. He sat down on the floor outside her kennel, back against the wall. "You know," he said conversationally, "I used to be a very important man, had more money than I could spend. People jumped when I said, "Jump." Hope's ears rotated toward his voice, and I was miserable. Completely, utterly miserable. But I did not know it, because I had forgotten what happy felt like. He stretched out his legs. Then I found a dog in an alley, a dog a lot like you, and everything changed. Hope crept forward, just an inch, but forward. I am not going to tell you it will be easy. It will not. Trust is hard. Healing is hard. Some days you will want to give up. Another inch. But I will tell you a secret. He lowered his voice, as if sharing something precious. The trying is worth it. Every single time. Hope was at the front of the kennel now, her nose poked through the chain link, sniffing the air. Edward held out his hand, palm down. She flinched, but did not retreat. "That is a good girl," he murmured. "Take your time. I have got nothing but time." They stayed like that as the night deepened. A man who had lost everything and found himself. A dog who was just beginning to hope. Two broken things, slowly mending. In the cottage. Karen looked out the window and saw Edward sitting by the kennels. Shadow lying beside him. A frightened young dog finally inching closer. She smiled and turned off the light. Some healings happened in hospitals, with medicine and surgery. Others happened in quiet moments, with patience and presence. And some happened in the space between two damaged souls who recognized something familiar in each other. That was the magic of this place. She thought, not the buildings or the funding or the mission statement. Just the simple, ordinary act of showing up, again and again. Until the fear finally faded, and something new could begin. Some stories leave a quiet weight on the chest. This one may have done that. The image of a man sitting on a cold floor beside a frightened dog, the thought of years spent building things that turned to dust, the ache of loving something that might not survive. These are not comfortable feelings. Many of us know what it is to carry something we cannot explain, to sit with a grief that has no clean edges, to find ourselves changed by a creature who cannot speak, or a child who sees what we have forgotten, or a stranger who stays when they have no reason to. Some of us have been Edward, walled off and surviving. Some of us have been Shadow, waiting to see if this time will be different. Some of us have been Emily, holding on with both hands to something precious and fragile. It is all right if this story did not wrap itself neatly. It is allowed to linger. You do not need to understand it fully or carry it forward. You can simply let it rest. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening, or